to keep with what we've talked about this morning. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. I wanted to delve in a little bit more to the concept of seeing God, and in keeping with a song as well, My God and I, as we walk through those meadows hue. It's come straight from Genesis chapter 3 and verse 8, and they heard the sound of the Lord God walking in the garden in the cool of the day, as I mentioned this morning. But I was talking to Brother Philip Gray about that after the lesson this morning. And I'm so thankful you brought out that this concept from Genesis chapter 1. And I'd like for us to go there this evening and look at this idea that we can see God in a specific way. Genesis 1, I want to begin in verse 24. It says, And God said, Let the earth bring forth living creatures according to their kinds, livestock and creeping things and beasts of the earth according to their kinds. And it was so. God made the beasts of the earth according to their kinds, and livestock according to their kinds, and everything that creeps on the ground according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God, verse 27, created man in His own image. In the image of God He created him, male and female He created them. And so when we see our fellow human beings, our fellow man and our fellow woman, we see God. Because in comparison to God creating animals, notice He made them according to their kind. That word specifically means species. And so there are certain species that God created on the sixth day, and there are subspecies, and they're all according to that same species. There's no intermingling. We understand the pattern that is there, because God created it that way. And so in comparison to the species of animals, God created us differently. We do not come from the animal kingdom. We do not come from animals. Even though we came on the same day, we are made in the image of God. In essence, we are the species of God. We are made differently than the animals. We're made in His image. So when we ask the question of what does God look like, we can look around to see what God looks like through mankind. And notice, because we are made in His image, it's not just the way that it's not about how we look. We understand that this is our soul. When He breathed into their nostrils the breath of life, verse 7 of chapter 2. This is our soul. This is our spirit. But notice, because we are made in His image, we have certain responsibilities. Verse 28. God blessed them, and God said to them, Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. We didn't come from animals, that is taught in our school systems. We came from God, and we were made in His image, but we were set above them, in dominion over them, so that we have a responsibility over them. Look at chapter 2 of Genesis and verse 15. He explains this responsibility a little bit more. The Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and to keep it. And so we understand that we have a responsibility to take care of what God has created. In the same way, God saw a responsibility in taking care of us. So it is a godly trait for us to be responsible. And that is different than any other animal. It's something that shows God. When we show responsibility, we show God. But notice verse 16, the Lord God commanded the man, saying, You may surely eat of every tree of the garden, but of the tree of knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat of it you shall surely die. So this shows another godly trait. There's godly limitation. God set limitations for us. Well, wait a minute. Can God have limitations? He's omniscient, omnipotent. He's all-knowing. He's all-seeing. How does He have limitation? Well, I like for us to look to Hebrews. Well, actually, let's look to Malachi chapter 3 and verse 6. For I, the Lord, do not change. Therefore you, O children of Jacob, are not consumed. God doesn't change. He doesn't change as human beings change. There's also, I'd like for us to look at Hebrews chapter 6 and verse 17. Hebrews 6 and verse 17 shows another godly trait, a godly limitation. So when God desired to show more convincingly to the heirs of the promise the unchangeable character of His purpose, He guaranteed it with an oath, so that by two unchangeable things in which it is impossible for God to lie, we who have fled for refuge might have strong encouragement to hold fast to the hope set before us. So when God set a limitation in the garden, He also had that limitation. He cannot lie. And so when He told us not to eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, He's giving a limitation. And notice, we understand that James chapter 1 and verse 13. Let no one say when he is being tempted, I am being tempted by God, because God cannot be tempted with evil, neither does He tempt anyone. God cannot be tempted. And so it's interesting, this is where the temptation, we were able to be tempted. This is where we were given a choice to remain in the image of God, to remain in this purity of God, to be changeless and to not be able to lie. This innocence. But notice in chapter 3 and verse 1, now the serpent was more crafty than any other beast of the field that the Lord God had made. And he said to the woman, did God actually say you shall not eat of any tree in the garden? The woman said to the serpent, we may eat of the fruit of the trees in the garden, but God said, you shall not eat of the fruit of the tree that is in the midst of the garden, neither shall you touch it, lest you die. But the serpent said to the woman, you will not surely die. For God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be open, and you will be like God. Based on Genesis 1 and verse 27, we're already like God, because we were made in the image of God. But notice when they did take of it, when their eyes were open to their sin, as we discussed this morning, if you will look at verse 22 of chapter 3. Then the Lord God said, behold, the man has become like one of us in knowing good and evil. Now lest he reach out his hand and take also of the tree of life and eat and live forever. Therefore the Lord God sent him from the garden to work the ground from which he was taken. He drove the man, and at the east of the Garden of Eden he placed the cherubim and a flaming sword that turned every way to guard the way to the tree of life. See, we were made to live forever because they had access to the tree of life. But because they had disobeyed God and they had changed what He had established, and they took of that tree, they experienced sin. Their eyes were open, and God did not want them to remain on this earth, did not want us to remain on this earth eternally separated from God. So we understand, though, that through His Son, He came to die on a tree, which offered us life. And He offered us that tree of life. He offered us that healing, as the book of Revelation expresses, that tree of life will be offered to us in eternity. And He makes it possible so that we can live forever with Him, my God and I, walking through the garden for all eternity. And He made it possible because He has chosen you and I to be a holy priesthood, a royal nation, so that we can be His own special people. Tonight, my question for you is, are you a part of that special people? Have you obeyed the gospel that He has established so that you can take part in the tree of life? Have you repented of the sin that is in your life and confessed that Jesus is Lord, been baptized in His name? This evening, this invitation is for you to make sure that this is offered to you. You can leave here a child of God, walking with God for all of eternity. But it starts with you obeying the gospel, because if you have sinned, you have fallen short of His glory. And you can be like God again when He takes the sin out of your life. This invitation is for you. If you need to respond, won't you come while together we stand and sing the invitation?